Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to take that big pile of information, those questions you have that desire to really get to the bottom of things and distill it all down into something clear, something insightful.
Exactly.
Today, we're starting right at the foundation, really the bedrock of Alcoholics Anonymous. We're exploring a really crucial document. Its impact is still felt today. It's called The Doctor's Opinion.
That's right. And it's more than just, an old piece of writing. It's a cornerstone text that fundamentally changed how alcoholism was understood.
Yeah.
It really shifted the whole conversation, moved it away from this idea of it being a moral failing, a lack of willpower.
Which was the dominant view for so long.
Absolutely. To understanding it as a legitimate progressive illness.
And our mission for you, listening in, is not just to get a handle on this vital historical medical context, which is fascinating in itself, but then to see exactly how these powerful foundational ideas, well, how they actually play out today.
Yeah.
In a really contemporary story of surrender and recovery, we'll hear how accepting alcoholism as a true illness, as Dr. Silkworth proposed, can just completely remove that heavy, crippling stigma. And in doing that, it opens a huge door to a new way of living. A kind of freedom, really, that many thought was impossible.
Yeah. We'll start by really unpacking that initial medical perspective, the one that kind of paved the way for AA. It was revolutionary for its time.
Definitely.
Then we'll look into the significant resistance it faced, because it wasn't immediately accepted, not by a long shot.
Right.
And finally, we'll bridge that gap between past and present. We'll hear a modern physician's very personal story, their own journey to accepting this very concept, this illness model, which ultimately led them to their first step towards sobriety.
It's a story that weaves together, science, pioneering science, really, but also compassion and that incredible power of self-awareness. It all kind of hinges on this one single but hugely powerful shift in understanding, a condition that touches so many lives, directly or indirectly. Okay, let's dive in.
Okay, so to really get why the doctor's opinion was such a big deal, we need to understand what came before it, the landscape, intellectually and socially. Before these ideas, before AA even existed, society mostly saw heavy drinking, uncontrollable drinking, not as a medical issue at all.
No, it was seen as, what? A moral problem.
Exactly. A moral deficiency, or just a stark lack of willpower. You weren't sick, you were weak.
And that phrase moral deficiency, it's hard for us maybe to fully grasp the weight of that today. But back then, the drunkard, as they were often called, they weren't just seen as someone making poor choices. They were often, well, stigmatized, weren't they? Vilified, even. Seen as totally responsible for their own unhappy state.
Completely. The thinking was they just needed moral guidance, from the church maybe, or family members who thought they knew best.
And the practical consequences of that view, beyond just the judgment, what did that actually mean for people?
Oh, the consequences were devastating, really. For the person struggling, obviously, but also for any hope of real understanding or getting effective help. It created this huge stigma, but also just massive confusion.
Infusion? How so?
Well, people, even close family, would constantly be asking, and you can almost hear the frustration, right? Why can't that fellow handle liquor the way I do?
Yeah.
It was just this pervasive, deeply ingrained judgment. They couldn't imagine an underlying cause beyond, a flaw in character.
So any attempts to help were probably...
Often shaming,
Or
punitive,
Yeah.
or just totally ineffective because they were based on a complete misunderstanding of what was actually going on.
There's a line in the text about actions being naturally considered at their face value without regard to inner impulses and their causes.
Yeah.
That really hits home. It's just this sort of intellectual blind spot, doesn't it? Making it almost impossible for, say, normal drinkers, people who could moderate, to really get the alcoholic struggle.
Exactly, and that led to incredibly futile advice, didn't it?
Like what?
Like telling an alcoholic, just learn to drink moderately. Or why don't you just have one or two? The text says they were not realizing that he is attempting to teach what can never be learned.
Wow. Can you unpack why that kind of advice was so damaging? It sounds well-intentioned, maybe, but...
Oh, he was incredibly damaging.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't just useless advice. It actively reinforced the person's own internal belief that they were the problem, that they were just lacking willpower, that they were morally weak because they couldn't do what seemed so easy for others.
So every time they tried and failed.
Exactly. Every failed attempt to moderate, every time they tried to follow that advice and ended up drunk again, it just plunged them deeper into shame and guilt and despair. They might genuinely want to stop. They might try with every fiber of their being. But the physical craving, the mental obsession. It was beyond their self-will at that point.
Creating this awful cycle of failure and deeper shame.
Precisely. Cementing the idea in their own minds and in society's mind that they were just somehow fundamentally broken, different, flawed. And it's against that really grim backdrop, that lack of understanding, that this truly groundbreaking idea starts to emerge. Alcoholism as an illness.
Not just a different word, but a whole different concept.
A whole different concept. A radical departure, characterizing it as a progressive illness, one that can never be cured in the traditional sense, but, and this is key, like some other illnesses, it can be arrested.
Arrested, not cured. That distinction feels huge.
It challenged everything. That ingrained notion of moral degenerates, of weak-willed people. It offered a framework that was scientific, compassionate, something beyond just blaming the person.
I mean, think about the immense relief the pioneers of AA must have felt. Just imagine hearing for the first time maybe something is wrong with your body, something out of your control.
Yeah.
After generations of being told it was them, their character, their choices, to hear it reframed as a physical reality, it must have been like, I don't know, shedding this unbearable weight.
Absolutely. Yeah. It allowed people to get off the hook, as the writing puts it, for our inability to maintain control when drinking.
So it transformed that perceived weakness of mind into something tangible, something physical. And the text likens alcohol to an allergen, right? How did that analogy resonate?
That allergen idea, which came from Dr. William Silkworth, was incredibly powerful because it offered a physical explanation for something that seemed completely inexplicable otherwise.
Right. Why can they drink normally, but I can't?
Exactly. For someone who had tried and failed again and again to control their drinking, someone just drowning in guilt and shame, the idea that their body was reacting differently to alcohol, almost like an allergy, was revolutionary.
It took the morality out of it.
Completely. It wasn't about being bad. It was about your body being wired differently.
Right.
It shifted the focus from willpower to physiology. Just like someone with a severe peanut allergy can't just try harder not to react. The alcoholic, according to Silkworth, couldn't just try harder to drink moderately. It gave them a framework that was understandable. And crucially, it wasn't judgmental. That opened the door for self-acceptance, for a different approach entirely.
So the question changed from why can't you stop to
There's something more like, okay, your body can't handle this substance. What can you do to live without it? A much more productive and hopeful question.
But, you know, even with such a revolutionary concept, something that seems so clearly helpful now, it wouldn't have been embraced immediately by everyone, would it?
No, not at all.
The text says acceptance of this revolutionary concept was initially half-hearted at best, even among most physicians. Why was there resistance there in the medical community? You'd think they'd be the first to grasp an illness model.
It's a really important point. It shows just how deep-seated those old ideas were. You know, for centuries, medicine looked for really clear physiological causes, broken bones, infections, that sort of thing.
Right, obvious physical problems.
Exactly. And addiction, with its complex behaviors, the choices involved, and that heavy layer of moral judgment. It just didn't fit neatly into those existing models.
It looked like bad behavior, not a disease.
Too many, yes. Even physicians who saw the suffering firsthand often still defaulted to seeing it as a failure of character, a lack of self-control. Plus, we didn't have the understanding of brain chemistry, of neurobiology that we have today.
So the physical allergy idea might have seemed a bit metaphorical or unscientific.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Or even like a convenient excuse to some. And you have to remember the stigma. Patients often wouldn't admit the full extent of their drinking, which made accurate diagnosis within that traditional framework almost impossible anyway.
So it took time.
A long time. The journey to wider medical and public understanding was incredibly slow. It just shows how deeply embedded that moral judgment was. Paradigm shifts like this, they take time to really take root, especially when they challenge core beliefs about personal responsibility.
And that societal conditioning, it meant people were sort of conditioned not to blame the precious alcohol itself, right? Instead, they believed there were just two types of drinkers.
Yeah.
The normal ones who can tolerate alcohol and the alcoholics who can't.
Yeah, that dichotomy was really strong.
How did that simple-seeming idea impact things like public health or just everyday conversations?
Well, it created this kind of dangerous denial, really,
Yeah.
both for individuals and for society as a whole.
How so?
Public health efforts, if they existed for alcoholism back then, were often rooted in temperance movements, preaching morality, not science or compassion.
Right, just say no, but framed as a moral imperative.
Exactly. And in just casual conversations, if someone drank too much, the focus wasn't on, maybe alcohol affects their brain differently. It was on their poor choices or their lack of control.
The classic, if I can handle it, why can't they?
Precisely. And that narrative let the true nature of alcohol's impact, especially on people who were susceptible, get completely overlooked. It was convenient in a way. It led society, and maybe even the alcohol industry, kind of sidestep the issue and keep the focus squarely on the individual's fault.
It really shows how cultural stories, even seemingly simple ones, shape our understanding of health and illness.
Absolutely, often to the detriment of those who are suffering the most.
Okay, so let's bring this into the present. Let's think about our modern physician. Let's call her Dr. Anya. Her story, well, maybe a composite, really echoes those early struggles, but with the added complexity of being a medical professional herself. Imagine Dr. Anya, highly educated, trained in science, knows all about disease processes, yet she's grappling with this illness that society, and maybe even parts of her own profession, still sometimes views through that old lens of moral judgment. The cognitive dissonance must have been huge.
Oh, immense. Almost agonizing, you'd imagine. Here she is, diagnosing patients, understanding disease progression, biological markers, all of that.
Right, she sees it from the outside every day.
Exactly. Yet her own mind, which is being affected by the addiction itself, is busy rationalizing away her own symptoms. Maybe for Dr. Anya, it started young, perhaps getting a bottle of rum in junior high, like some stories mention. Not just for rebellion, but for that feeling, that instant, complete freedom it gave her.
A relief she couldn't find elsewhere.
Possibly. Quietness, sense of fitting in, relief from anxiety maybe. And that initial feeling, that escape, could have been so powerful that she kept drinking for years, convincing herself it was normal. Her way to unwind after stressful shifts or cope with the pressure.
And she could explain away the signs, maybe.
Very likely. Attributing fatigue or irritability or maybe memory lapses to her tough job, the stress of patient care, anything to the alcohol. And her medical knowledge could actually make the denial more sophisticated. She could use medical jargon to explain things away, even to herself.
Wow, yeah. Using her expertise as a shield for the denial. So this insidious progression you mentioned, where drinking became a major part of my life, how might that look for someone like Dr. Anya? Maybe not the violence, the fighting, the illegal acts seen in some older accounts, but for a respected professional, the consequences would be just as devastating, wouldn't they?
Absolutely. The outward signs might be different, less dramatic perhaps, but the internal damage, the professional risks, just as severe, if not more so. Dr. Anya might find herself isolating more, prioritizing drinking over family, over professional development.
Maybe near misses at work.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
A slight tremor during a procedure she dismisses as fatigue. Forgetting key detail in a patient's chart. Showing up late for rounds hoping no one notices the smell. Maybe developing a kind of tough guy or tough woman image to hide her vulnerability. Getting defensive if anyone asks questions.
And external validation could complicate things too, right?
Hugely. Her family might still be proud of me for her career success. Relatives might even encourage me to relax with a drink. You deserve it after such a hard week.
Right. Unwittingly enabling the denial.
Exactly. So you have this confusing web of her own rationalizations plus this external reinforcement.
Right.
It completely masks how bad things are getting, even from herself, until, the consequences become absolutely undeniable. Maybe her license is threatened or a major opportunity collapses.
So despite her professional understanding of disease, that personal acceptance, the real turning point, often comes from that place of deep despair, rock bottom, when the illusion of control just shatters. Maybe for Dr. Anya, it was a prodigious bender, as the text puts it, something that directly threatened her career, a research grant, a partnership, maybe her license itself started to vanish, and then that stark moment of clarity. I woke up. This had to be stopped. I saw I could not take so much as one drink. I was through forever.
That moment of clarity is crucial. It's often described as a gift of desperation.
But it's not always enough on its own, is it? Even with that absolute certainty in the moment.
Rarely. That's the baffling power of addiction. Even after making that definitive decision, those sweet promises to yourself, to others, the disease can just pull you back in. Dr. Anya, just like countless others, might have sworn off alcohol forever on Tuesday, only to find herself drunk again by Friday.
Wow.
It just powerfully illustrates that powerless aspect, that self-will, no matter how strong the initial resolve, is often just insufficient against the physical craving and the mental obsession. It hammers home that this isn't just about making a better choice, it's a condition that requires something more than sheer determination.
That cycle of resolve, relapse must be soul-destroying.
Absolutely. And it deepens the shame each time.
And for someone like Dr. Anya, a medical professional, she would have been so keenly aware of the stigma surrounding alcoholism. Even though it's maybe lessened somewhat over the years, the text notes it's still present, sometimes powerfully so.
Especially within the medical field itself, perhaps.
Right, so she might have felt incredibly lowered in my own estimation, maybe believing she was the lowest thing that God let live because her own internal concept of an alcoholic was likely still tied to those old, negative, moralistic images.
Yeah, that internal conflict would be intense.
How did that shame, compounded by knowing how others might perceive her, affect her ability to even think about seeking help?
Oh, it'd be a massive barrier, a suffocating weight. Her own internalized stereotypes, maybe picturing an alcoholic as someone homeless, unemployed, completely dysfunctional, would clash violently with her identity as a capable, respected physician.
So admitting the problem felt like betraying herself.
Exactly. A profound self-betrayal. It threatens not just her career, but her whole sense of who she is. It's why many professionals, not just doctors, go to such extreme lengths to hide their addiction. Fear of ruin, ostracization, disgrace. The thought that she, a healer, could be afflicted with something so stigmatized, it would feel like an unbearable personal failure.
Okay, so the breakthrough then. The real turning point that opens the door to recovery for Dr. Anya. It must have come with finally truly accepting alcoholism as true illness.
Yes.
And that's not just like intellectually agreeing with the idea, is it? It's deeper.
Much deeper. It's a personal integration of that pioneering medical view we talked about.
Yeah.
And crucially, that acceptance starts to lift the personal moral stigma.
So what did that acceptance unlock for her? What did it make possible in terms of actually starting recovery? And how does the idea of a higher power fit in?
It unlocked everything, really. That moment of acceptance, seeing it not as an excuse, but as an honest diagnosis. It was like finding the key to a cage she didn't even realize she was locked in.
How so?
Because suddenly it wasn't about her being weak anymore. It was about having an illness.
Right.
And that allowed her to finally acknowledge her powerlessness over alcohol without it feeling like a character indictment.
Right. It reframed the powerlessness.
Exactly. And her journey then mirrors what's in the bigger book. We admit we couldn't lick alcohol with our own remaining resources. Her intellect, her medical training, her willpower, none of it had worked against this specific illness. And so we accepted the further fact that dependence upon a higher power could do this hitherto impossible job.
And that higher power doesn't necessarily mean religious conversion, right?
Not necessarily at all. For Dr. Anya, it might be the collective wisdom of the recovery community, the principles of the program, a connection to nature, or a more traditional spiritual concept. The point is acknowledging that her own power was insufficient. It's an admission that some force greater than her individual self, however she defined it, could provide the solution she couldn't find alone.
So accepting the illness allows for accepting powerlessness, which then opens the door to accepting help from something beyond herself.
Precisely. That acceptance of powerlessness and the willingness to seek a different kind of strength is the critical gateway. It's a profound shift from relying only on the self to relying on something greater.
And that acceptance of the illness, it leads directly, undeniably, to taking the first step, admitting powerlessness over alcohol. For Dr. Anya, the physician, this wasn't about embracing weakness. It was about a scientific recognition.
You could frame it that way, a scientific and deeply personal recognition of a physical and psychological reality. It's like finally accepting the data, even when the data is about yourself.
There's a quote about realizing, I didn't know that I had no power over alcohol, that I, alone and unaided, could not stop. That raw honesty.
That's the core of it.
How does that surrender to the truth, paradoxically, lead to freedom? It seems counterintuitive.
It absolutely does, especially for high achievers like Dr. Anya. Her whole life, her training, it's all about competence, control, solving problems. But with alcoholism, those very strengths, intellect, willpower, self-reliance, they actually become liabilities.
How so?
Because the disease thrives on that illusion of control. Next time I'll manage it. I just need more willpower. So when Dr. Anya finally concedes, my way isn't working, my best efforts are failing and actually making things worse, it allows her to stop fighting that impossible battle against herself.
So surrender isn't giving up.
No, it's giving in to reality, acknowledging the facts of her own body, her own mind. For a physician, that's actually a very scientific approach, isn't it? Accepting the evidence.
Yeah, I suppose it is.
And this act of humility, it's what opens the door to asking for help, accepting help. And that's the real path to freedom, because only then can new strategies, effective strategies, actually be implemented.
In that acceptance, that powerlessness brings humility. You mentioned is essential. There's a line. To say I need help is not an easy thing for many people. We'd prefer to manipulate people into meeting our needs or struggle along without them. That really resonates. What does that journey to humility look like, especially for someone like Dr. Anya, who's usually the one giving the help?
That's a huge hurdle. It strikes right at the core of her identity. Her whole career is built on being the expert, the one with the answers, the one people turn to. To switch from that role to being the one who says, I don't know, or I need help, it requires dismantling years of conditioning, a lot of ego.
So humility here isn't about like putting yourself down.
Not at all. It's not self-abasement. It's really just an honest assessment of your place, recognizing you're not the center of the universe, that your personal resources have limits. The first step is this profound act of conceding mentally and hopefully spiritually that we cannot do this alone anymore. It's the conscious choice to turn things over, to rely on that higher power and the support of others. And that's not a one-time decision. It becomes a daily practice, learning to lean rather than trying to carry everything yourself. So building on Dr. Anya's breakthrough, her medical background would actually give her a deeper layer of understanding as she moves into recovery. She'd appreciate addiction as this incredibly complex condition, with biological, chemical, neurological, psychological, medical, emotional, social, all these underpinnings.
Right, it's not just one thing.
Not at all. She'd understand, for example, how substances like alcohol temporarily enhance the brain's dopamine functioning and how that creates this really powerful learning mechanism in the brain that's incredibly hard to just switch off.
That's crucial, isn't it? Moving beyond the idea that it's just a choice. Can you elaborate a bit on that? How does dopamine, this learning molecule, actually rewire the brain to crave alcohol? What's happening physically?
This is where modern neuroscience really backs up those early intuitions from the doctor's opinion. When alcohol hits the brain, it floods the reward pathway, key areas like the VTA and the nucleus accumbens with dopamine, way more than natural rewards like food or sex.
Okay.
This creates intense pleasure, sure, but critically, it reinforces the behavior of the drinking that led to it. The brain learns. Alcohol, intense reward. And with repeated use, the brain physically and chemically changes. The neural pathways get stronger, basically hardwiring the brain to seek out alcohol.
So it changes the brain's priorities.
Absolutely. And Dr. Anya would know that the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for judgment, impulse control, thinking about consequences, gets compromised. It gets overridden by the more primitive reward system, which is screaming for that dopamine hit. The brain is essentially hijacked.
So for someone whose brain has adapted this way, moderation isn't just difficult.
It's next to impossible, as the text says. Because it's not just a matter of wanting it less. It's a deeply ingrained biological drive fighting against a weakened control center. It's a physical and mental condition, not just a lack of willpower.
So it's not just about forgetting how bad it got. The brain has actually physically and chemically changed, and that dopamine connection means if you drink again, your brain immediately remembers. What does that imply for relapse prevention? Even after years of being sober, it sounds like you need constant vigilance.
It absolutely requires constant vigilance, and that's a tough but vital truth for long-term recovery. Those strengthened pathways, those powerful memories etched into the brain's reward system, they don't just vanish completely.
They lie dormant.
In a sense, yes. Even after years of sobriety, the brain immediately remembers that connection. Alcohol, reward. It's like a deeply carved path in the woods. You might not walk it for years, but step onto it again. Take that first drink and you can instantly be right back in the thick of it, the craving re-engaged.
Which explains the phenomenon of craving they talk about.
Exactly. That physical compulsion that takes over once alcohol enters the system for an alcoholic. It's why, for many, complete abstinence isn't just a good idea, it's a biological necessity. Dr. Anya, the physician, would understand this perhaps better than most. Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic in terms of the body's reaction. It reinforces why the first step isn't just about the past, it's about the present and future too. Requires continuous commitment.
Okay, so that initial surrender in step one, admitting powerlessness, it evolves, doesn't it, into something broader, this ongoing idea of humility and dependence.
Yes, exactly. Humility means to show submissive respect, as one source puts it. And by being humble, I realize I'm not the center of the universe. That's not a one-and-done realization. It's an ongoing practice,
A daily
a
practice.
daily practice. Constant vigilance against slipping back into self-centeredness or pride or that illusion that I can handle this on my own now.
So, for Dr. Anya, who spent her life being the center of medical decisions, the expert, learning to really internalize, I am not the center of the universe, must be, well, challenging, but ultimately freeing, maybe.
Definitely both. Challenging, yes, but profoundly liberating over time.
What does that ongoing practice of humility actually look like day to day? How does this show up?
Oh, in lots of small ways and some big ones. Initially, it's the humility to admit you were wrong, to actually listen to people who've been through it, to take suggestions from a sponsor, even if your ego bristles.
Right, even if you think you know better sometimes.
Especially then. For Dr. Anya, it might mean admitting to a colleague, I'm overwhelmed, I need to step back from this case
Yeah.
instead of trying to power through. Or just asking for help with something simple outside her usual domain. On a deeper level, it's about accepting you don't control everything. Life happens. Relying on that higher power and on the support network isn't weakness. It's actually tapping into a greater strength. It means letting go of always needing to be right, always being in charge, always proving yourself. That allows for a much more peaceful way of living.
And a crucial part of that support network, that different way of living, is that the journey isn't solitary. That seems so vital in recovery.
Absolutely critical.
The idea of fending off loneliness. Dr. Anya, like so many, might have felt isolated even when we were among a lot of happy, celebrating people. That feeling of being separate, even in a crowd. It's such a hallmark of addiction, isn't it?
It really is a profound, often agonizing loneliness, separated by the secret, the shame, the obsession.
So how does the fellowship, the community of others in recovery, specifically address that isolation? What does that sense of security they talk about really mean?
The fellowship tackles that isolation head-on. It provides a place where you're instantly understood, no explanations needed, no judgment. For Dr. Anya, walking into a meeting might feel like finally taking off this heavy mask she's worn for years.
Oh, okay.
The security isn't just physical safety, it's emotional, it's spiritual. It's the security of knowing you're not alone. That your struggles, which felt so unique and shameful, are actually shared experiences.
You hear your story in other people's stories.
Exactly. You listen to speakers, you talk with other members, you just absorb the atmosphere of confidence and hope, as one text puts it. That shared experience turns isolation into connection, shame into empathy, despair into hope. It provides role models, accountability, and that deep sense of belonging that was missing. It's a new, healthy support system. Foundational.
Okay, so this leads to the understanding that recovery isn't just stopping drinking. It's a long period of reconstruction.
That's right.
It's about building a whole new way of life, a spiritual life. And the quote is, "It is not a theory, it works, but I have to live it." Which implies a daily discipline.
Definitely. A daily discipline that goes way beyond just that initial acceptance of the illness.
So this spiritual life, for Dr. Anya, it wouldn't necessarily be about formal religion, unless she chose that, but more about principles and practices for inner growth.
Precisely.
What does that daily discipline look like? Things like self-examination, meditation, and prayer. How do those help people continue to take personal inventory and continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along? It sounds like constant maintenance.
It is. It's like maintaining spiritual fitness.
Mm-hmm.
For Dr. Anya, self-examination means regularly, maybe daily, looking honestly at her thoughts, her feelings, her actions. Where did fear creep in? Where was she resentful? Where was she acting out of self-will? Not to beat herself up, but just for awareness, like reviewing a chart, but for her own spiritual condition.
Okay. And meditation, prayer.
Meditation can be anything that quiets the mind and fosters connection. Mindfulness, quiet walks, focusing on breathing. It helps create space between impulse and action. And prayer, again, isn't necessarily asking for stuff. It might be expressing gratitude, asking for guidance for the day, or just affirming that reliance on her higher power. Help me do the next right thing.
Got it.
These practices are the tools for that ongoing inventory. They help you spot those new mistakes, maybe a flare-up of ego, a moment of dishonesty, and set right them quickly before they grow into bigger issues or resentments that could threaten sobriety. It's about maintaining that clear connection to her spiritual core, which then guides her choices. It's recognizing recovery as a lifelong process.
And as Dr. Anya keeps going in recovery, she discovers that the things we put in place of drinking are more than substitutes for it. It's not just swapping one thing for another. It's a genuine transformation of how life feels. Life without the artificial stimulus of alcohol means finding a real kick out of life, experiencing release from care, boredom, and worry. What does that actually look like in practice? What's the goal here, beyond just staying sober?
It's realizing that real joy, genuine connection, lasting peace, they don't actually come from a substance. They come from within. They're cultivated by living this new way. For Dr. Anya, it might mean rediscovering passions she let go of, engaging more authentically with her family, her friends, even her patients, finding real meaning, maybe in helping others.
So the kick out of life isn't that artificial high.
No, it's the deeper satisfaction of living in line with your values, having clarity, being present, and that release from care, boredom, and worry. It's not about numbing out. It's finding a kind of spiritual serenity, an acceptance that comes from surrendering that need for control and trusting the process, trusting her higher power.
So the ultimate goal isn't just not drinking.
No, it's to live at peace with ourselves and then often show others who still suffer the same fears that they could get over them too. It's about embodying that hope, showing that freedom is possible and carrying that message. It's a life transformed, lived fully, purposefully, without needing the artificial boost. Hashtag tag outro.
So wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you listening? We've gone back to the roots, seen how the doctor's opinion laid such critical groundwork, really shifted the whole understanding of alcoholism away from moral judgment towards seeing it as a complex medical condition. And we've also seen how a modern physician's personal journey, Dr. Anya's story, mirrors that historical shift, how embracing that illness concept, embracing surrender, totally transformed her relationship with herself and ultimately her path to recovery.
Yeah, this deep dive really underscores a vital truth, I think. Addiction isn't just about good choices versus bad choices. It's so much more complex. It's biology, psychology, social factors, all woven together.
Right.
And accepting it as an illness like those early AA writings championed and like individuals experience today, that acceptance isn't an excuse at all. It's a powerful truth. It's what enables the healing. It allows for that fundamental shift you need to actually recover. It's seeing reality clearly, which then allows for real change.
And that leaves us with a final thought, something for you to maybe mull over. If accepting a really tough challenge, especially something as stigmatized as alcoholism, if accepting it as an illness can lift so much shame and open the door to such profound transformation, where else in your life might you be holding on to a kind of moral judgment? Maybe about yourself or about someone else or just a difficult situation you're facing. What if you reframed it, not as a failing, but as a condition or a process, or just try to understand it differently? Could that lead to your own aha moment, your own point of surrender and growth? Just consider how sometimes that simple shift in perspective, that can be your most powerful tool for change, unlocking new ways to find peace, make progress, and maybe find a new kind of freedom.